Okay, good morning, Daniel, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise, and we met at PTC in January, and I found the conversation we had really refreshing because I genuinely believe you're doing things a bit differently to the average developer. And I have to say, given the business that I'm in, I do pride myself on feeling like I know every single developer out there in the market, particularly in the States, which admittedly is becoming a bit more difficult these days because there's so many new startups. But honestly, legacy had flown under my radar until last year, and that surprised me given like just what you've already delivered. So I suspect I won't be the only person who isn't too familiar with you guys. So could you give me and anyone who's listening a bit of an understanding of both your background as an individual and an overview of both legacy investing and legacy data centers?
Absolutely. I think to some degree, it's not an accident that you didn't know who we were. We sort of enjoy flying below the radar. But yeah, so I was in tech startups for a number of years and participated in, I guess, 6 different startups. The last of those, which I took public with my now real estate business partner named Jay Rappaport. So Jay and I ultimately looked at the world around us and said, okay, where do we want to be spending our time and energy? And our belief when we were in tech was owning infrastructure was a better longer term focus. So when we thought about who made money in the gold rush, we were like, well, the guys selling the jeans and the pixes and the shovels, they made money consistently. Some people found gold. And that's what startups always felt like to us, which is some people were finding gold, but not everybody. And so let's be the folks needing the infrastructure. That was about 15 years ago. So really after the cloud had been invented, but not long after that, we launched Legacy with the explicit focus being on, it was actually e-commerce. So we also own e-commerce warehouses. So e-commerce and data centers. And the idea was that is core infrastructure. The next, way we're living tech evolution was going to drive us to. As you and I have talked about today, we've deployed data centers in particular around the country. We've done everything from enterprise to colo conversions, adaptive reuse, AI direct to chip, turnkey buildings, build to suits, ground up development. So we've really done the whole spectrum, and the tenants in our buildings are all household names that everybody in our sector is very familiar with.
Great. And you talked about your background in tech startups, 6 tech startups. Do you think that background gives you a bit of a different approach to this business versus those who might have entered the development world through maybe a more traditional route?
At a minimum, it changes how we've looked at data centers and real estate as a whole. And I think compared to other real estate folks I know, part of it is because we weren't trained to think about real estate a particular way. Now, I do think some of the developers in data centers have a similar background. They didn't necessarily come from, the classic real estate background. So I think a couple of us have managed to take advantage of this, but we were able to come into it with fresh eyes. We look at data centers not as buildings, but as machines. They're really large scale machines. That lens helps us think about these buildings in unique ways, which is what is allowing us to, in particular, do some of the types of projects that we're doing, particularly from an adaptive reuse standpoint, because we're not constrained to say, oh, this is how it's supposed to look, or this is how it's supposed to sort of be approached. Really, we're like, well, this is a large scale machine. We understand that the tenant of the building really is a machine at the end of the day. And so we can design around that. And that's allowed us to, I think, have fresh perspective and do some really interesting things.
Yeah, and I would like to dig into some of those, at least 1 or 2 of those projects later that you've spoken to me about before. But what about on the flip side? Is there anything from tech that you maybe have to actively unlearn when you go into this space?
I was going to say, in tech, there's this vision that everybody's doing something futuristic and grand and algorithmic, and I sort of came into real estate investing and was expecting that everybody had quants running around doing really sophisticated things. And I will say that is not the case. What I always found fascinating about this business is it's at some point it is, I don't want to say simple, but there is a certain element of it that is, a little bit more straightforward. But I think that understanding also evolved that there is so much of real estate that is relationship-based, community-based. The projects that we're doing as data center developers, we are changing the built world for communities, and those communities have strong opinions about what we're doing. And that does require a lot of sophistication. And so something, I think a lot of us are dealing with right now is how do we, as data centers continue to propagate and gain in scale and impact, there's political narrative that's very, it's well known that there's a lot of negative data center sentiment right now. And I think there's a lot of sophistication that we can bring towards how we think about building these buildings, introducing them into the world, working with communities. That is very exciting to me. So less sophisticated, I suppose, than some of what I naively expected when I was in tech. Sophisticated in a different way and a different skill set. And so I'd say that was the arc that we had to navigate.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into some of the projects that you're working on at the moment. So I think it's fair to say a good chunk of developers right now are racing to build like gigawatt-scale sheds in ex-urban or suburban areas. Just a quick look on the legacy data centers website shows that you're doing something a bit different to that. Building AI inference data centers in like downtown Chicago, for example. Right in the urban core. Can you tell me and anyone who's listening a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So we're seeing a bifurcation in the data center market. I mean, maybe if I step back for 1 second, we really look at so far there's been 3 distinct data center cycles. So I call it pre-cloud. So before, 2009-10, there were a lot of enterprise data centers being built, or data centers were buried in office buildings, right? So you had that phenomenon too. Those were really enterprise focused, smaller data centers. You didn't yet have virtualization and cloud technology. And so those were built and constructed in a particular way. And then that's where you saw like the Equinix and Digital Realty and others form, right? Then you had, sort of the advent of cloud, and you saw data centers go from, 3 to 5 megawatts to 30 megawatts. And there was a whole development cycle that came out of that. And that's where you watched a lot of the Vantage, Aligned, QTS, and others grow up, right? I tend to think of those as almost preferred developer programs with the hyperscalers, because you were rolling out massive amount of cloud buildings, and so you saw a lot of that. AI has launched now another tier, and that has, and cloud continues to grow, so I don't want to minimize that. But within AI, we've seen the need for large scale campuses, token factories, as it were, training facilities. And so those can be very large, but the market has further bifurcated such that you also have a significant amount of desire from tenants below 100 megawatts. It makes sense why large scale developers are going after these campus plays. And I respect that. When we look at the world and say, where else is there opportunity and demand within the sector right now, under 100 megawatts for sure. They do tend to be a different type of build and approach. Our tenants tend to want to be in more urban or populated areas, particularly in core markets. And we felt like, given our background and track record, that was a great place that we could add value. And so that's really been our focus right now, is under 100 megawatts. Our buildings today, and this is really driven by the market, are anywhere from 20 to 70 plus megawatts. And as you said, some of them are in deep urban core. So we bought the CBOE headquarters, which is right down inside the town, Chicago, inside the loop. We're converting that into a data center for a large user. We did this in downtown Minneapolis. We converted really an office tower from the 1980s into an AI data center that's 40 megawatts. So, and excitingly, and something we could talk about, is it's actually a mixed use data center. It's half office, half data center. I don't know any others at that scale like that. And we have projects going on in multiple other major markets right now that sort of fit that profile.
Yeah, could you dig a little bit deeper into that mixed use development? And
so that particular building, the address is 1001 3rd Avenue. It's sort of a funny story to me. It is Sleep Number Beds corporate headquarters. So the first half of the building is for Sleep Number Beds. In fact, the Sleep Number Beds logo is on the outside of the building. The second half of the building, it's about a 500,000 square foot building, is in an AI data center and has 40 megawatts of critical capacity. That conversion we started in, I guess, 2020. or so. I will tell you, I think there was a mindset in the industry that wasn't possible. The idea that you would mix those, and particularly at that scale, was not, I don't think is even today common knowledge. It has worked very successfully, and I'm excited about it because it creates I think, an example of the fact that data centers can be beautiful. They can be buildings the community wants. So this is a beautiful glass office tower. You wouldn't know there's a data center in it. In fact, most people think of it and reference it locally as the Sleep Number Bed building, because that's what it looks like. We've had tenants come in, or prospective tenants come in when they were touring and say, I think I'm in the wrong spot. Like, this is too pretty. This can't be there. There's light space. There's a cafeteria. There's amenities. So overall, it's a really beautiful, dynamic building. But it's a data center. It doesn't have barbed wire around it, right? And so that model is exciting to me because it works, and it works very well. And we have, I can't disclose who the tenant is, but it's one of the major users, and so that shows there are other ways and other models to think about data centers right now.
What do you think it is about that model that made some people think it wasn't possible?
When we think about real estate, we tend to think in sort of fixed topologies or approaches to doing things. Apartment buildings tend to be built a certain way. Office buildings tend to be built a certain way. There is some discussion around a data center looks like this. And I think we all have an impression that data centers are boxes with barbed wire fences around them, and they sort of look like prisons. They don't have to. I think a combination of maybe coming out of tech or a perspective that these are still very new and undefined. I mean, data centers as a whole are only about 25 years old. That is incredibly exciting to me, because that says there's still room to define what they are, what they look like, how they interact with the world. And because they're really a form of infrastructure, there's a lot of flexibility too. There's a lot of flexibility around how they look. And so I think the concept was, this is not safe. Don't experiment with this. But we did it, and it was very successful. And we are doing that now in other markets with equal levels of success. And I would argue, as the political cycle has shifted, that approach becomes even more powerful. So in 2020, there wasn't a negative sentiment against data centers, and particularly urban data centers. Today, there is a lot of negative sentiment around data centers. But I will tell you, the data centers we are doing in these urban cores, people don't realize they're data centers. They think they're just buildings.
On that topic of more sophisticated and more beautiful design, you mentioned when we last spoke that you're hosting a couple of events at Milan Design Week, that I think later this month on, I think you called it AI and craft. So can you maybe talk about what the connection between that world and what you're doing with these buildings is? I think you've already started to talk about it, but can you expand on it from that point of view as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So correct. At Salone, which is the big design week in Milan, a week from now, I'm hosting 2 events on the intersection of AI and craft. And there's a big discussion. I see this across multiple industries, but there's a big discussion amongst the craft and design world around how AI is going to influence it. And frankly, you see this I was in Austin this weekend, and ChatGPT had billboards in sort of on South Congress Street, which is where all the shopping districts are and the cool kids hang out. And they had cultural related billboards around ChatGPT. And we're seeing that conversation at scale, that their data centers, our view is that data centers are cultural institutions. They house our social experiences. They house our memories. They, all of your text messages or iMessages, those are going through data centers, right? And I think the AI companies are aware that there's a cultural impact to what they're doing as well. And so we've tried to embrace that both in how we approach buildings, but also in the world more broadly. And so one of the conversations, I'm hosting 2 salons where it is a roundtable discussion of how AI is impacting craft. One of my favorite stories is Clooney lace is a type of lace that Chanel, for instance, uses in its fashion shows. And the looms that make that lace are over 150 years old. And the technology for how to program those looms has been lost. Probably most of your audience will know this, but original punch cards for programming computers actually came from looms. So looms were programmed the way the original computers were for all intents and purposes. That technology is lost. The folks that know how to maintain these looms, they are at the end of their lives. And so there's this concept that within craft, there are dying technologies or there's knowledge that's being lost. And AI, a positive standpoint, has the ability to help preserve that, maintain it, and even perhaps expand on it. And so there is, I think it's interesting. As developers, I go to conferences all the time where there's all this negative sentiment around data centers. How do we deal with all this negative sentiment? How do we get our data center approved by the local community that doesn't want us here? That sentiment I hear all the time. When I'm at like Salone and Milan, there's a lot of excitement around AI. It's like, oh, this could preserve human knowledge in a fresh way. This can help us, preserve culture. And so I'm deeply excited about the fact that as data center developers, we're able to have a positive impact. I think we are building the foundation of how society will continue to live, the next 50 years.
You've referenced negative community sentiment a number of times so far. We've seen the Wall Street Journal ran a piece recently about Maine trying to block data centers, and we're seeing pushback from communities across the USA. You're clearly not getting the same level of resistance. In your opinion, is it the design-led approach that's making the difference there, or are there other factors at play too?
A lot of the negative sentiment and fear around data centers is that people don't necessarily understand what they are. I think that's one. I think two, if you go to, say, Loudoun County, I know, since I have a home in Northern Virginia, one of the reasons people are angry is what used to be, say, farmland or greenery now, and this is their words, not mine, look like prisons. They're large, they're visually heavy. They're covered in security fencing. They're not attractive, and they overwhelm the scale of the space. Those are actually architectural problems that can be dealt with. One of my favorite examples is when people go to Manhattan, they love to take the photo of the skyline, right? If you're standing in New Jersey, just across from Manhattan, people will take photos of the New York City skyline. They're not taking photos of the Meadowlands. Why? Well, the Meadowlands are ugly industrial boxes, right? And the New York City skyline are beautiful boxes. But at the end of the day, they're all just boxes, right? And go one step further. They're very interesting windowless boxes as a whole. Many of us love Frank Gehry museums. Well, Frank Gehry museums don't exactly have windows. They are just large boxes. And if you sort of step back from a Frank Gehry museum for a second, you can imagine that it could have a data center inside of it. And yet we like those. And so we've actually catalog all the buildings that we find that are windowless and could be data centers, but are not, but that people find beautiful, right? And so I guess I do think that, if you just look at the built environment as a whole, which buildings do people like and which people don't, regardless of data center, they tend to like beautiful buildings. And there's a reason why people like, glass architecture. And so I think part of it is people drive past something and see something ugly, and it's hard to wrap their head around it. And then you layer on top of that the fact that it's unknown, that they may have had an experience where they experienced a loud data center, or they experienced a data center, or they see their utility bill going up and they presume it's because they saw the data center go up too. So there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of confusion around this. I hosted a dinner salon at my home last week on the topic of water in partnership with Georgetown University. And so we had a whole conversation with individuals from across the data center community on the impact of water. And I would say the main conclusion at the end of that dinner was that there's just a lot of lack of understanding, and that understanding causes panic and fear.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to switch the conversation now to talk about how you've built the team at Legacy. Building a high performing team in a complex business like this can't be easy. So can you maybe talk to me about your approach towards how you think about the culture that you wanted to build at Legacy, and what does that look like in practice as you've scaled the organization?
As you know, in your business, culture really matters, right? And this is a business where, while we do build data centers, at the end of the day, our core, the core of what we do is, real estate is effectively a commodity. And so really it's the people that matter, right? I mean, the people are who make or break great companies within the real estate sector. And so we take we take culture very seriously. I mean, we have a couple of core cultural tenets that we focus on and hire for, and that's really leading with curiosity. Uh, I think a lot of people like to talk about that, but at the end of the day, we're doing stuff that has never been done before. Again, in all of human history, data centers are a very, very new phenomenon, and a different type of building than ever has been built before. That there is no clear playbook. You have to be curious. You have to be willing to think critically about the problems that we're facing and come up with creative and new solutions to that. And if that gets you excited, then you're wired a certain particular way. And so that's what we're really looking for, is people that are excited about the challenge ahead, are curious about it, and are passionate about wanting to do something. So that sort of is embedded in our team culture. The other core tenet of our culture is really performance-based, right? So this is a very high octane business. There is a lot of financial risk in the business. In particular, what I did not say is when you're doing buildings under 100 megawatts, they are spec. They're not built to suits where everything's tight with a bow and you're just building it. You are actually taking real material risk in terms of how you execute on these. And that requires a very high degree of skill and capability and performance. And so we recruit around that and focus on adding team members who have those capabilities. And then this is, I think, unique in our space. We do share the profits of the company with the entire team. And so this comes from our tech startup days. So in tech startups, it's a well-known understanding that to maintain talent, particularly top technical talent, you need to share in the upside that you're all building something together. While we do not do that with stock options because the nature of our business is not the same as a startup, we do that through a profits pool, which is basically the same mechanism that you would sort of see in stock options, but with an enhancement that it's every year and it's real cash, not just options. So every year we actually take the profits of the company, we create a pool within that, and then we share that out with everybody in the business.
Especially given most of the developers in this space are private equity backed, where everyone's working towards an exit and a change of ownership for an LTI to materialize. So I think to be getting that on an annual basis is a real differentiator.
Frankly, it's structurally something we solved to in our business since day one, right? So coming out of tech startups, I lived through the idea that you really focused on one exit for 5 to 7 years, and whether or not the team shared in that exit depended heavily on timing of the markets too, right? And I realize that's a risk we all take, but if you can spread that risk across multiple investments, you inherently de-risk it. That's what the venture capitalists do. As a team member, because I consider myself part of the team too, there are good years and there are great years, and we can't control the markets, so sometimes there are bad years. But at the end of the day, if we're able to collectively share in that, that de-risks every year. That de-risks that bet together and as a team, and allows us to share in the upside. And so that is something that culturally is deeply important to us, is that we are high performance, but we're sharing in it together as a team, and everybody on the team has everybody else's back because we're all equally incentivized. There is nobody at the company that is the only type of person that gets paid, right? So meaning some real estate firms I've definitely seen, well, the partners get paid, but the employees do not. That does not fit our culture. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that is not how we are built.
Can we look a little bit ahead to the next few years, and can you maybe give us a little bit of a understanding of what we can expect to see from Legacy over the next 2-3 years?
We see a continuation of demand in the marketplace right now for these, I'll call them under 100 megawatt buildings, more urban. Some of those are adaptive reuse. Some of them are ground up. We are doing both. We have about 5 different projects going on across the country right now. I expect there's going to be more of those just because of where we are in the cycle. And a question that I get is, well, why downtown? I mean, part of it is demand parameters, latency. Part of it is there's a lot of existing infrastructure we can tap into, right? And speed to market really matters right now. So I would say over the next 2 to 3 years, I expect still a continuation of that. From a team standpoint, I think we hired 4 people in the last 2 weeks. So we are, we're growing based on that demand. And I expect it will continue based on everything that we're seeing. Frankly, I've been in data centers for about 15 years. I have an awareness that 5 years from now, I don't know what we're going to all be building. It will be some version of something. But I try not to think about it 5 years out. But yeah, over the next 2 or 3 years, I expect a lot more of this current stage in the cycle.
Awesome. And final question, and look, this may be some of the stuff that you've already been talking about, but if you could challenge one deeply held assumption in the data center industry right now, what would that be for you, and why?
Data centers do not have to be ugly. They don't have to be buildings that communities dislike. I've been in a lot of developer conversations where there's an argument that you show up to your community meetings and you just have to sort of elbow your way through them. That I fundamentally think, while that approach does happen and can work, I think there is an alternative. And that is, I think we can give communities buildings that they want, that they accept, and that they're even excited are in their towns and that are good for the city. So if I take my Minneapolis project, we increased the tax base. We revitalized a building that would otherwise be mostly vacant. We added jobs. And because of the amount of investment we're putting in that building, the building is ultimately a prettier, better kept downtown urban core building than it would otherwise have been. And it wasn't going to go back to being office. And so I think as a net, that was a large net positive for the city. And the community either doesn't know it's a data center, which I think is a positive in this case, or they are, and it has defined a different type of approach.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Daniel. Really enjoyed talking to you. Wish you and the team at Legacy all the best as you continue to grow.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.